Hi, welcome back to the Soft Focus. Today I'm diving into one of my favorite topics, and that is garden planning. I could honestly expound on this topic all day, and I think you'll find this episode really useful if you've been wanting to plant a garden but need some extra help in crafting a vision and bringing it to life. Or if you're someone who has a few seasons under your belt and you're just looking for some new ideas to bring some creativity into your process, you might like learning about what we do at Late Bloomer Ranch and what I do in my own kitchen garden at home. Let's dive in. You might be thinking that because it's still winter in the Northern Hemisphere, that this isn't the right time to start on your garden. Well, that's not true. This is actually the perfect time to start on your garden, and I'm going to show you why. In this mini episode, I'm going to walk you through 8 steps to conceptualizing, building out a successful summer garden full of flowers, vegetables, fruit, and herbs, or whatever else you want to grow. And I'm going to break down these 8 steps one by one, but I'm also going to talk you through some common mistakes I see and how to fix them, as well as some little pointers along the way. Step 1, build the vision. For me, the creative rush at the beginning of this process is like almost the best part. I absolutely love planning. I have Saturn in Capricorn. I love building out a vision for the future and putting together the pieces to make it happen. It's so exciting to me. Over the years, I've gone through so many garden plans, most of them way too ambitious, like eyes bigger than my stomach, buying 3 times more seed than I could ever need or find the time to plant or be useful. And I want to save you from that fate. I want to help you build out a vision that's actionable, that works for your needs, that's fun to carry out, and that brings you success instead of feelings of overwhelm way down the line. The best way to build this vision is to start with the foundational elements that will help you discern which varieties to plant, when to plant them, how many to plant, etc. So they're just some basics. If you're in the USA, you're going to start by looking at your USDA hardiness zone. That is a demarcation that's going to be based on your lowest of low temperatures as well as your highest of high temperatures. That's going to help you decide which plants can survive in the temperature range where you live. Next, you're going to look at your first and last frost dates. So these are similar to your hardiness zone. They're going to tell you about frost, the cold temperatures, but it's really going to help you create what's called like a growing window, a growing season. So your first frost date is how early the frost comes in the fall, and your last frost date is how late you generally get a frost in the spring. Additionally, after that, you're going to look at your latitude. And your latitude is going to help you understand how much daylight you're getting at the peak of summer and how much daylight you're getting in the darkest point of winter. And this will let you know whether you're in a long day area or a short day area and just how much light you can generally expect. Because temperature and light are the things that are going to help you understand which plants are going to thrive in your garden and which plants to avoid planting. Next, look at the top 10 meals you love to cook. You cook them all the time. They excite you. It's what you look forward to making. They're easy for you, and they're just like in heavy rotation. And I'm going to emphasize this because this is not about what you are aspiring to cook. This isn't about the kind of chef you want to be. This is about what you actually eat. I will tell you a little story about when I started vegetable gardening. I got really into the Seeds of Italy catalog, which is an heirloom seed catalog with seeds from Italy, like the name suggests. And I planted so many seeds, so many varieties, and I was planting things that were like what I thought were cool, not necessarily vegetables and fruits that I really cooked with. So I planted a bunch of cardoons. For those that don't know, the cardoon is related to the artichoke. I had never even cooked a cardoon in my life, but I planted probably 12 row feet of cardoons, feeling ambitious and inspired. I wasted so much time and energy on these plants and maybe got one dish made that whole season, braised cardoons with some pecorino romano. It was fine, but it didn't really meet my needs. And instead, I spent all this time wrestling with these plants that I had no real use for, I got no joy out of, and it was just sort of a fool's errand. So Don't do what I did. Look at what you actually make and write out the ingredients that you would want to grow in your garden. Maybe you make the same summer salad all summer and you just look forward to it all year long. Plant those ingredients. Or maybe you're more like me and you look forward to the return of soups and stews in the autumn all year long. Maybe you want to have lots of onions and carrots and winter squash. All of it's fair game. It can all go in your garden. You just want to prioritize what works for you and put that at the top of the list. If you're new at this, let's try and stick to 5, 10 items, varietals between the vegetables, the flowers, the herbs that really excite you and things that you love to cook with. And at this point in the process, don't be shy about adding like fun teas or beverages that you like. If you're really into your chamomile tea before bed and you have yet to grow fresh chamomile in your garden, I'd highly recommend it. When you're growing medicinal herbs and you're drying them at home, they're so much more potent than anything you could find at the drugstore shelf. They're just freshly dried and the medicinal properties are much stronger and the fragrances are delightful. It's just a whole different experience. So you aren't going to be limited to dinner. It's really whatever is going to be fun for you. Maybe you want to grow calendula and dry the blossoms and sprinkle them on cupcakes for your husband's birthday. It's whatever you want to do. That's what's going to make your garden really interesting and fun. Let's start taking all of these considerations and running them through your USDA hardiness zone, your first and last frost dates, and your latitude. If that sounds like a lot, it's really not, and I'm going to take you through it with a little example of onions. I love onions. I eat them all year round, and even though they aren't very Pinterest worthy and they aren't going to win me any awards for my gardening skills, they're always in my garden. And that's because I actually eat them and I love them and they're fun for me to grow. So if I'm looking at different varieties of onions that I want to include, I'm first going to see which can survive in zone 4B. That's my zone. It gets as low as 30 degrees below zero in Fahrenheit. So that's pretty darn cold. And in the summer, the high temps are usually like high 80s, low 90s, and that's on a handful of days in the heat of summer. So our summers are generally pretty cool. Luckily for me, many onions can thrive with cool summers and very cold winters, even though most of them I wouldn't leave in the ground to overwinter. However, there are a couple bunching onion varieties that can live here overwinter if they're well cared for. So I've got that covered. Onions work in my cooler summers with a short growing period. Now I'm going to look at my frost dates. That's going to help me determine exactly how short my growing period really is. So in general, my first frost is in early September and my last frost is in mid-May. In this part of the world, I could kind of get a frost any time of the year, but these are averages and they help me make a plan. As a quick side note, I always have row cover so that if I do get a frost in the middle of my growing season, I'm as prepared as I can be to cover my plants in the garden, tuck them in nice and cozy, and hope that they survive. So far, we've been lucky with row cover. It's not a perfect solution, but if you're in an area like mine where you could get a frost in the middle of your growing season, I highly recommend row cover. How to calculate how long your growing season is. As I mentioned, in general, my last frost date is mid-May. Let's call it May 15th. And in general, my first frost is in early September. Let's call it September 5th. I can have an average of 90 to 100 frost-free days a year that I can plan on. Again, it's not perfect, but as I'm looking at onions, I can take that number and I could see how many onions can come to maturity from seed during that time. There are a couple, but just to be safe for this example, I would also start the seeds indoors before the last frost date so that they could get a head start and be sure to spend most of their adult and adolescent onion lives out in the field during our frost-free zone. So if you're looking at your crop list and you're seeing that you have a short growing season, but you want to grow some varieties that have a longer time to reach maturity, make sure you have access to indoor growing to get your seeds started. That could be your windowsill. It could be a room in your basement with grow lights and heat mats. It could even be a closet that you've set up just right. But you will want to have indoor growing areas if you want to grow some longer season crops with a shorter frost-free window. Next, I'm going to look at the latitude. And onions are a latitude sensitive crop. Some crops are not, but onions are. And snapdragons, another crop I love to grow, are also latitude sensitive. What does that mean? That means certain varieties are sensitive to how long the days are, and that sensitivity changes whether or not the onion will create a bulb or whether it will keep growing and growing and growing. So I'm in a long day region. I'm in a northern part of the country, and my summer days are incredibly long and my winter days are incredibly short. If you are closer to the southern part of the country or closer to the equator in general, you may want to get a short day variety or a day neutral variety, meaning one that isn't sensitive to day length. So again, just run each crop that you want to grow through this little checklist and make sure that it fits. As an aside, I'm looking at onions. And as we mentioned, they do really well in our cool summers. But let's say I wanted to grow tomatoes that also have 100 some odd day growing window. Unlike onions, though, tomatoes need warmer soils to thrive. So I would also have to start them indoors for my region, but I would have to wait to put them out a few weeks later than my onions, and I would have to take that into account. If you are looking to grow warm season crops in cool areas, I highly recommend getting a soil thermometer and listening in later on in this episode as we talk about the difference between raised beds and sunken beds and using burlap, for instance, and other tools you can use to kind of mitigate and strategize maintaining different temperatures in your beds. So just to summarize that bit, if you want to grow warm season crops and you're in a cool area and you can kind of barely squeeze it in with your frost-free window, definitely prioritize indoor growing. Start the plants extra early so that they're really robust transplants by the time they go out in your garden, and hold off until the soil temperatures are high enough that those warm season crops would thrive. So instead of having like a 60-degree soil temp, you'd want the soil temp to be 65, 70 degrees. Okay, you have your vision. You know what you want to plant. You have your foundational elements of your hardiness zone, your frost-free window, and your latitude. Now you want to create the map. You want to put this vision of what you're trying to do for your microclimate into a map of where everything's going to go and make sure that there's space for it all. So, when you're making a map and you're figuring out where to plant your garden, what do you want to consider? The first and most important thing to take into account is which direction are you facing? Traditionally, south-facing gardens and southeast-facing gardens do best. We want as much light as possible, and we want that light in the morning, and we want that light directly overhead, nourishing all of our plants. Now, if you're in an area with really hot, sunny, long days, you may get away with a southwesterly facing garden if some of the crops need a little bit of shade or a little bit of relief. But I would avoid northern gardens for your vegetable, flower, or medicinal herb gardens. You may be able to squeeze in a couple shade-loving plants, but it's not where you want to start as a beginner, and you're not going to be able to grow the most variety of things, and you might be disappointed at which things do not do well in a north-facing garden. So take that into account first. Light is so essential to what you're doing. Next, you want to look at drainage. That basically means, how does water move through your garden? Flooding is an absolute no-no. You don't want to plant in the floodplain of your property or your garden space. So if it's a place where water pools whenever it rains, even if that's a south-facing spot, you're not going to want to plant your garden there. You're also not going to want to plant your garden where water just runs off and erodes. It's going to take away all of your compost and topsoil and wash it down into your local watershed. That's not what you're looking for healthy crops or plants either. So you want to find a place where the drainage is good, meaning that the water seeps into the ground at a good pace so that it's not too muddy, but it's also a little bit damp. You don't want it to be super, super dry. A note about dryness: if you are planting into a really sandy spot, you can amend that with organic matter. You can add compost. You would have to add quite a bit, but that is actually a place where you can make noticeable improvements. Whereas if you're planting into a lot of really hard clay, you may need to build beds on top of the clay and add some planting soil from a garden store to make it work. I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but really, really heavy clays can be hard for beginning gardens, and they can be hard to aerate enough to help with the drainage. So if you had to pick one problem, it would be better to be on the dry side than on the clay side, but what we're really looking for is good drainage. The soil doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it to be able to drain the water effectively. Look for places where the plants are already growing well in your garden landscape. That'll tell you where the water is moving effectively. Wind exposure. Baby plants are also very, very sensitive to wind. You could spend the next couple months growing some baby seedlings, getting so excited to put them out in your garden, planting them on a very windy day, and coming back the next day extremely disappointed from how they fared overnight. Plants can be killed by wind, and they can also just be generally maligned by wind. You don't want that. So try and find a place that's protected from the wind. If you are on a windy spot, you might look to plant next to an existing structure or an existing planting that can act as a windbreak. You may also want to plant a little windbreak in your garden. You may want to plant some more robust trees and shrubs or trellised plants or something that can act as a windbreak for your other more delicate seedlings. But if you have an existing structure or an existing planting that can act as a windbreak, be sure to use that too. And lastly, this is really important, and it may not seem really important at first, but you want this to be an area that you frequent. Even if the most perfect south-facing, well-draining, wind-free zone is available on your property, but it's 10 acres away from your kitchen window, I would plant closer to home. And the reason why is because the single most important factor of whether or not your garden succeeds or fails is you. You're going to provide the TLC, you're going to provide the attention, and if you aren't putting eyes on your garden, it's not going to do very well. So don't forget to find a spot that's close to you. That's more important overall. I promise that you will grow more usable food in a little window box outside your kitchen window than you would in 10 raised beds that were half a mile away, just because you won't be able to take care of them as easily. One of the most common pitfalls I see at this point in the process is how much to plant of each type. How do you decide? How do you figure it out? Well, you're going to work back from your preferred recipes back in your vision. You're going to go back to step one. If you're like me, you're always going to need more carrots and onions than you think, and you're always going to need way fewer zucchini than you wanted to plant. It's just the law of how these things work. And to make this a little bit more tangible, I thought it would be interesting if I went back to my younger self 15 years ago when she was just getting started in all of this, and I made her a kitchen garden plan for her first kitchen garden. And it would look a little something like this. I'd start with 3 garden beds, roughly 3 feet by 10 feet, and probably another little 10 square foot buffer zone for some pollinator plants or medicinal herbs or something. So let's call it 100 square feet. And in that space, I would want to put about 8 square feet of onions, some bulbing, some bunching, and that would be about 40 onions, depending on what kind you planted, and some scallions. I'd have another 8 square feet of carrots. That's going to be approximately 126 carrots planted in succession, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'd have about 5 square feet of beans because I am a haricot vert nut and I love green beans in the summer season. I also love drying beans in the fall. So I'd have about 5 square feet of beans, which is plenty of beans for one person obsessed with green beans. About 10 square feet of garlic. That's going to give me a little bit more than 20 heads, again, depending on how they're planted and what varieties are chosen. But I love garlic and I would never want to skip it. It's also a super important companion plant in the garden. And I would have about 5 square feet of greens, and I would mix these in with the garlic and onion. And for me, I'm in a colder region, like I mentioned, so I like to focus on arugula, kale. But 15 years ago, I was living in a much warmer region. And so for her, I would recommend focusing on collard greens and summer lettuces, like a summer hardy butterhead. You can be really flexible with the greens and focus on the ones that you're going to eat the most, that are going to be the most useful in whatever culinary preparations excite you to eat. Okay, I would also have my younger self plant about 10 square feet of cabbages. This will be about 10 cabbage plants, about 5 square feet of cucumbers. That's enough space for about 2 Persian cucumber plants planted on trellises, letting them sprawl and get really big. About 8 square feet of strawberries. Like, I love fresh strawberries from the garden. So I wanted to make a lot of space for those for my younger self. And if I ever have extras, I can always freeze them, give them to friends and neighbors. It's really not a problem. So 8 square feet is a lot in a 100 square foot garden, but I was prioritizing what's important to me, and you should prioritize what's important to you. 10 square feet of tomatoes. I always like to plant at least 1 cherry tomato, 1 heirloom slicing tomato, and 1 paste tomato for preserving sauces and frozen tomatoes throughout the winter for cooking projects. Just like with the strawberries, it's pretty hard to have too many yummy, ripe summer tomatoes. And I always prioritize a big enough footprint for even just one person like myself. Now, of course, I have a family, and so that footprint's at least double, but it comes back to knowing yourself and what you love to cook. Then I would have about 10 square feet for winter squash. Now, winter squash are big and they spread a lot. So I'm only going to be able to fit 3 plants maximum in that space, more like 2. And I always plant the baby blue Hubbard. It's my favorite winter squash. It just works the best for the kind of cooking that I like to do. But again, maybe you're someone who likes summer squash. Maybe you want to skip squash altogether. Maybe you want to try 10 square feet of corn. It's really up to you. Lastly, I would add 10 square feet of mixed herbs and mixed flowers. So in my mixed herbs, I would mix a stand of culinary and medicinal, and I wouldn't need to repeat those herbs throughout the square foot zone. So I could have 1 chervil, 1 cilantro, 1 burdock, 1 calendula, 1 chamomile, 1 shiso, 1 parsley. It's as kind of whatever works for you and your setting. You don't need a ton of extra there, because even 1 plant of, say, calendula is going to give you a ton of calendula resin for your balm and your salves. Similarly, with the flower planting, I would focus on having beautiful blooms throughout the growing season that were fun and brought an interesting visual array. I would mix my flowers in throughout the vegetables and herbs. Wouldn't necessarily arrange these in a cookie cutter 1-by-1 orientation, but you can make those decisions as you're making your own planting map. So for me, I would probably pick for my younger self, cosmos, sweet peas on a trellis, rudbeckia, agrostemma, aka corn cockle, ranunculus, delphinium, and foxglove. And just a note, delphinium and foxglove are poisonous. So if you're like me and you absolutely love them, I do plant them in my garden, but I'm just aware of that whenever I'm harvesting any food to eat. This is a great time to do a little bit of research on companion planting. So in the examples I just gave, I could have a couple synergies by planning my map to have, say, carrots and tomatoes side by side, because they're excellent companion plants and they work together. Or having chamomile next to cucumbers next to my green beans. All 3 of those work together and make incredible synergies that improve flavor and reduce pest pressure, etc. So just do a quick cursory glance at your garden map and see if there's any easy swaps you can make to improve companion planting. But I wouldn't lose sleep over it. And I wouldn't put that at the center of your garden plan. I would definitely focus on the things we talked about in step 1, the hardiness zone, the frost-free window, and the latitude before I worried about any companion planting. Step 3, we're moving along. Create your calendar. Now that you have a vision and you know where everything is going to go, you need to figure out when you are planting what, and you're going to put all of that in your calendar. This should go hand in hand with your lunar calendar, your work calendar, your family calendar, etc. This garden needs to fit into your real life. So I wouldn't plan to do all of your seeding on the same week of your son's wedding. You're going to want to be able to space things out so that you actually have time to achieve your garden goals. You want them to be realistic and attainable, and you want to have a calendar that works for you and sets you up for success. So how do you do that? When I make my calendar, I like to start with the harvest in mind. So let's take a tomato. Everyone loves tomatoes. Everyone looks forward to summer tomatoes. Maybe you would like to have summer tomatoes in May, but if you're like me and you're living in Idaho, that's pretty unrealistic without supplemental heat and supplemental light, like I talked about earlier with soil temperatures and frost and day length, etc. The earliest I could ever hope for a tomato would be mid-July, and let's call it July 15th. I would put that on my calendar. Hopeful first tomato harvest or something like that. Then I would take that type of tomato, maybe it's my black cherry tomato that I always love to plant, and I would look at July 15th and I would subtract 75 days because that's how long that tomato takes to form fruit from the time it's transplanted. And if you take July 15th and you subtract 75 days, you have May 1st. I'm also going to put that date in my calendar. That is the day that I need to put the tomato plant in the ground, May 1st, in order to have the fruit by July 15th. And so then I'm going to take May 1st and I'm going to walk it back 6 weeks. That gets me March 20th. And that's the day I have to plant the tomato seed in a seed tray on a heat mat indoors in my hoop house if I want to have a tomato to eat on July 15th. So all of these go in my calendar. You can get all these dates online, like a quick Google search will help you understand which zucchini you want to grow and how many days to maturity, or which type of lettuce you want to grow and how long it takes to grow from seed. All of this information is readily available. It's also on your seed packet, and we'll talk about purchasing seeds in the next step. I also like to take this time on my calendar to think about my fertilizer schedule. So I'm not big on adding supplemental fertilizer. We amend our beds with compost every winter so that in spring they're ready to go. And we do provide some fertilizer throughout the growing season, but I like to be intentional about it and I like to know what I'm adding and when. So I add an OMRI listed fish emulsion with kelp meal, and I also add an OMRI listed calcium. I use the fish emulsion once every 2 weeks and the calcium once every 4 weeks. Both are applied through our irrigation system and they're diluted in the drip tape. So all of that goes in my calendar as well. You should really just think of the calendar as anything that you need to remember to support yourself throughout the growing season. It's going to be busy. It's going to be hot. It's going to be too much weeding and too much harvesting, and any kind of garden is going to take work. And guess what? That's the fun part. But you want your calendar to be supportive of you, not something that's overwhelming you. So think of yourself in mid-August, just knee deep in all the produce that you're harvesting. What kind of information are you going to be prone to forget? Throw that in your calendar now. Some plants like carrots or lettuce or arugula will need to be in several successions. I mentioned that earlier. This means you're going to want to schedule 3 to 6 plantings of the same thing over one season. So in my example of planting a garden for my younger self, I mentioned that I would want enough space for 126 carrots, but I wouldn't want to harvest all those carrots at once. Instead, I'd want to harvest about 10 carrots a week over the growing season. That's how I'm going to plan my successions. I'm going to do the same thing that I did before with the tomatoes. I'm going to think about harvest dates. I'm going to think about when these crops do well. For me, I'm not going to be harvesting many carrots in early August, but I will be harvesting carrots in June and September. So being able to calculate back from when I wish to harvest to when the seeds need to go in the ground, and planting 3 or 4 successions throughout my garden so that I'm continually enjoying carrots whenever they're in season. You can do this for head lettuce. You can do this for arugula. You can do this for some flowers that do not have long bloom periods or only bloom once, like stock. It really depends on what you have on your list, but be aware that certain plants, once you harvest them, they're not going to grow again. They're not going to produce another batch of fruit or leaf or root, etc. Those are the plants that you're going to need to plant in succession. Step 4. Okay, let's locate high quality seeds and supplies. This is such an important step. I see a lot of people run out to their local garden store and just buy whatever. I understand the impulse, but it's not going to set you up for success. Instead, you want to find small scale farms, small scale seed producers, small scale garden stores that are more in touch with your microclimate where you live, because these businesses are going to be the ones who are growing out the seeds. A lot of bigger seed purveyors, they just buy and sell seed. They don't really grow it out. They don't try and improve the genetics by growing them in their garden and selecting for what's best. If you're interested in this topic, please check out my episode with Don Tipping. He runs Siskiyou Seeds in Northern California. He's such a genius. He built out a dreamy seed company where his farm and other small farms that they partner with grow out every single variety that they sell year after year to improve it year after year. And his seeds always grow. They always do well, especially for people who are in a similar growing climate to him. And he really thinks about this when he's selecting seeds, like how will the home gardener do with this variety? Is this good enough for the home gardener to have success? Are these seeds strong enough for the home gardener to get a bumper crop of zucchini or rutabaga or zinnias or whatever? So look for small scale seed companies that are growing out seeds and that are there to help you. And they'll be able to tell you whether they're growing in a similar microclimate to yours. All you have to do is reach out. Maybe you do have some good garden stores in your area who are doing this. And maybe you also have some small farms in your area who can help guide you to the kinds of varieties and seeds you want to plant in your garden. I love Siskiyou Seeds. I love Wild Garden Seed. I love Seeds of Italy that I mentioned. I love So True Seed in the South. I love Uprising and Adaptive Seeds in the Pacific Northwest. Native Seed Search in Arizona. There are just so many. A Turtle Tree Seed in upstate New York. Wherever you find yourself, just try and find a small-scale seed producer in a similar microclimate. You're going to want to use the same strategy when you're shopping for starts. Starts, transplants, they're the same thing. I use the terms interchangeably. And if you are doing this garden because you want to have a dreamy, natural, holistic Shangri-La in your backyard, do not go buy starts or transplants from your local big box store. Those things are just saturated in herbicides and insecticides and chemical fertilizers and all kinds of things. Also, in addition to just generally being full of commercial chemicals, even if they happen to be certified organic, they're usually these very standard varieties grown in California or Texas or Pennsylvania that are expected to do well all over the country. So they just ship the same varieties all over the United States. I'm not sure how they do it in Europe or other parts of the world, but that's how they do it here. And it's not a recipe for success. It's not a recipe for really tasty, really productive, like blow your mind, delicious summer gardening. It's a recipe for kind of mixed results. And like I said, that's not even taking into account all the toxic chemicals. So please do not go to a big box store. Do not simply look for the cheapest starts or transplants. Try and work with local farms, local producers, small scale producers who are from a similar microclimate to yours. The same is going to go for things like potting soil, your fertilizers and amendments, what kind of wood you want to use to build planting containers if you decide to do that. This is also a good time to think about your irrigation setup. We're going to want to look for high quality materials. You want them to be clean. You want them to be free of chemicals and insecticides, etc. So whenever you find your preferred garden store online or in person, you want to find the cleanest materials possible because the soils and compost and fertilizers can be full of things you would never want to put in your garden either, unfortunately. Step 5, determine your seed organization and record keeping system. Now, hold on. Do not skip ahead. I know people love to skip this step. They don't think it's for them. They think their garden is too small, but hear me out. When things get going and they're crazy and you want to really have the best summer garden possible, organization is only going to help you. And record keeping is going to be what takes you from being an average gardener to a great gardener. It's going to make your garden something that's less of a, didn't really work out for me, and more of a, wow, I have gotten so good at this, because it is just a skill. So I like to use little Tupperware Rubbermaid containers to store my seeds week by week. So I know what I'm planting week 1 of my season, week 2 of my season, week 3, so on and so forth. I use my calendar that I created in step 3 to organize the seeds appropriately. So if I'm doing succession plantings, I have enough arugula in week 1 and enough arugula in week 3 and enough arugula in week 5 to know exactly what I'm planting in the season. And I don't have to go back and look. I don't have to struggle. I don't have to wonder. I have it already predetermined and I'm organized and ready to go. Similarly, I like to have several copies of my seed calendar and my seed spreadsheet on clipboards in report covers so I can bring them out to the garden with me, bring them out to the hoop house with me, and take notes as I go. Why does this matter? Well, if one variety is always getting sick, never growing as fast as the others, if I'm seeing a weird leaf blight, if I'm overwhelmed with the number of snap peas I'm harvesting, or underwhelmed with the number of cucumbers I'm picking, I want to have notes about that. And in the middle of the season, it's often too hard to troubleshoot on the spot. And usually it's this time of year when I'm crafting my garden plan, when I look back at what I did the previous year and turn it into actionable steps for the future. So I would recommend having a system. How do you want to organize your seeds? How do you want to organize your planting and transplanting plan? And where do you want to put these things with enough room to take notes? What kind of notes are you looking for? I would recommend looking at not only harvest and yield, but what dates things started to yield. I would look at disease and pest pressure. I would look at irrigation needs. I would look at how often fertilizer is being applied and how much. And I would just take these notes every single week. I would recommend picking one day a week, let's say Friday afternoon, where you just walk through your garden and you just take notes and you just enjoy everything. No note is too small. You're learning, and it's going to make it more enjoyable and more productive overall. Okay, we're almost there. 2 more steps. And these are both dependent on your location. So step 6, start sowing your seeds. This may not work for you right this minute, depending on where you are. But if you're in a southern area where it's warm enough to start planting seeds, have at it, get going. And if you're in a more northern area and you have access to growing seeds indoors, have at it, get going. And if you don't, there's still time for you to get prepared. All you need to start sowing seeds is some potting soil and some seed trays or a place out in your garden. If you're indoors, you want it to be like 60 to 70 degrees. You don't need it to be super hot for most of your early season crops. And just start getting after it. You'll learn so much in the process. If you're planting out into your garden, you're going to maybe have to worry about the soil temp and work with some row cover if you're in an area where you might get a frost. Step 7, begin bed prep. Now, your seeds do not have to be sprouted for you to begin bed prep. This is just taking that garden map, measuring out your beds, making it match your map, and starting to work the soil if it's early enough to be worked. If you're like me and you're in an area where it's still covered with snow, you're going to have to wait a little while. I like to do most of my bed prep in the fall so that when things thaw in the spring, I can get right after it. But if you are able to work your soil, just getting in there, adding some compost, shaping your beds, it's going to be wonderful. It's going to give you a head start. You do not need to plant into your beds right away. You can even use tarps to keep them covered before your transplants are ready. But creating the beds is going to give you a real head start. And once your beds are created and shaped and you have your seeds started, you're on your way. Okay, a little note about shaping beds. I know earlier I talked about raised beds versus sunken beds. And this is a question I get all the time. Do I need raised beds? Sometimes when people think about raised beds, they think about like garden container plantings that are quite raised off the ground, maybe 3 or 4 feet even. Other people think of beds that are just slightly raised off the ground. At Late Bloomer Ranch, we plant in raised beds that are just ever so slightly mounded off the ground, maybe 6 or 8 inches at the highest point of the raised beds. It's not very much, but that little bit of extra space between the ground and the top of the bed warms up the bed faster when the sun hits it as a factor of surface area, as well as provides good drainage, because when it rains here, it really rains and we can get pounded. So if you're in a wet area, if you're in a cold climate, you may want to consider raising your beds. Also, if you have super clay soils that are going to be hard to grow in, you may want to build a planter box on top of your soil. No need to put down like a foundation or a barrier between your clay soil and your planter box, but you may want to plant or build a planter box rather on top of your clay soil and fill it with a more loamy soil. You want to find the great quality ingredients like we talked about earlier to build your garden bed. If you're in a hot or dry area, you want to do the opposite. A raised bed is actually going to work against you and not for you. So even though you may see lots of raised beds on Pinterest or at farms that you like or other beautiful gardens, if you are dealing with low moisture or a hot climate, you actually might want to even dig your gardens into the ground. You may want to use like how the Hopi have done it in the southwestern United States. They would dig maybe a foot underground, 10 inches underground, and make these square gardens where the plants would collect water whenever it rained into these little basins. And that would help keep the plants cooler and keep them better irrigated. If you are in a temperate climate and you don't want to raise or sink in your bed, you can just have it be flush with the ground. That's wonderful. That works for so many growing situations. If you're not trying to heat up your soil or cool it down, that's optimal. A quick note on black plastic. I don't like it. I have a vendetta against black plastic. I know it's great at suppressing weeds, but it's also great at putting a bunch of disgusting microplastics in your precious soil. They could end up in your vegetables, in your flowers, in your dog's mouth, in your kid's mouth. I think we have enough plastic in the world, and I don't recommend it. I do like to use burlap, however. Burlap is abundantly available. It can be organic certified. You can plant seedlings under it and watch them come up through the burlap. So it does provide some weed suppression. It can also keep your beds cooler in the summer if you have a lot of very hot days at high summer, or if the temperature heats up really fast, like it sometimes does here. Burlap can cool things off and keep things a little bit more temperate. Step 8 is just to put it all together and transplant out your seedlings into your garden beds and watch the magic happen. Enjoy your gardening season. Follow your planting calendar. Consult your map. Use your organization system. Make those delicious recipes that you built out in your vision. Take lots of photos. Have so much fun. Congratulations. It's going to be a great garden year, and you have an amazing plan. Okay, common mistakes. These are things that I have done myself or that I see people do all the time, usually both. First, and I mentioned this earlier, but planting way too much variety. You do not need to plant every vegetable under the sun. You want to plant what's actually going to work for you. You want to plant the flowers that you really love. You want to plant the medicinal herbs that you're actually going to dry and turn into tea. Otherwise, this will be overwhelming and you'll feel burnt out more so than empowered by what you planted. I'm always tempted every year to plant too much, and I'm glad to say that every year I plant less and less variety. Next, and I referenced this slightly earlier, but I really want to make a point here. If you're planting things that are not right for your microclimate, if you're planting seed from people who did not grow it out and it might not be good seed, You could be walking away thinking that you're not good at gardening when really it's not your fault. If you planted a subpar variety that was never going to thrive in your area, you could have done everything else right and still gotten disgusting radicchio. It's just possible. So please be sure to work with small farms, small seed producers, small garden centers that can help you find varieties that are going to do well in your area. Using the wrong mulch material. This happens all the time. People will just pick up like a straw bale from their neighbor's farm and put it in their garden, not realizing that maybe it has glyphosate on it, which will kill many of their crops, or not realizing that the bale of straw is going to spread a lot of seed and create a lot of weed pressure. Try using burlap. Try using certified seed-free straw from an organic producer. Maybe do some cardboard lasagna gardening this fall, but don't just run willy-nilly with mulch because you could end up creating a lot of downstream impacts in your garden. Okay, this is a big one. Over-fertilizing, over-irrigating, thinking that we just have to apply metric tons of compost every week to our gardens. You're going to create disease pressure. You're going to create some airflow issues. You're going to create all kinds of problems if you're just dumping on compost or foliar feeds or any kind of extra nutrition. There are many places where you can get your soil tested to see what you're working with. You can use companion planting to put things like beans or alfalfa or other nitrogen fixing plants throughout your garden. Or you can also just get on a schedule that's more measured and increase the fertility if you need it, instead of looking at downstream impacts of too much fertility later on. So a lot of people struggle with aphids. Not many people know that aphids can be caused by too much excess nitrogen in your crop beds. Don't get trigger happy with the fertilizer. Come up with a plan that's moderate and measured, and you can increase it over time if you need. Okay, the last mistake I see is people obsessing over what kind of soil to put in their garden. Just use your garden soil. And yes, I mean it, even you. You can add compost if it has problems draining. You can add compost if you're really low in organic matter or fertility. You can even add up to 50 or 60% compost if you're really, really lacking. But it's probable that your garden soil already is great, and you only need to add maybe 20 or 30% compost and not as much as you think. It's very unlikely that you need to go buy bags of soil from your local garden or hardware store. I would only recommend that if you had heavy clay soils or some kind of arsenic, lead toxicity in your soil, or if you're building up in container beds above the ground. Those are the reasons why you may need to bring in outside soil. But if you have access to planting in the ground, your soil is probably wonderful, and there are many places where you can send out samples to test. Plus, if you continue to plant in your soil, in the ground, with some high quality compost or worm castings or other good quality fertilizer, you're going to improve your soil organic matter over time. And that is a net benefit. Thank you for listening to this episode. It has been so fun to share this with you. I look forward to see what kind of gardens you plant this summer. Tag me if you post any photos of your garden, and reach out to me via email if you have any questions or other mistakes that you've made or things that you're confused about, or if you want to share your garden planning method. I would love to hear from you. So let me know, tag me, drop me a line. As always, if you're enjoying this podcast, it would mean so much if you could like it, subscribe it, share it with someone who you might think would benefit from this. And if you have any gardeners in your life, please share this episode. Okay, until next time.